Dear colleagues, thank you for attending the Expert Roundtable Postdoctoral Programs and Policies, Challenges and Institutional Diversity. The organizers of the roundtable are Center for Scholarly Integration and Russian Postdoctoral Fellowship Program of HEC University in Moscow, Russia. My name is Anna Pravdyuk. I'm a part of the organizers team. I would like to introduce our moderators, Dr. Vera Maltseva and Dr. Denis Ananin, research fellows and Russian postdocs at HEC University. We are all happy to see you here today.
Thank you, Anne. Dear colleagues, welcome to our roundtable discussion. My name is Vera Maltseva and I'm a postdoc at the Institute of Education, High School of Economics, and one of the two moderators of this panel. And my co-moderator, Denis Ananin, is a postdoc at the Center for Institutional Studies at the HEC as well. First of all, we're very excited to host this discussion and very thankful to our panelists and all the participants for joining us tonight. This roundtable is quite untypical, and that's not because we have two moderators. By the way, we will try to do our best to keep seamless transitions between our parts, but the untypical thing is that we are both postdocs, and we are discussing tonight postdoc agenda. So we are, in some respect, are the subjects of this discussion, but I hope this won't put any bias on the whole discussion and rather contribute to intensity of the discussion. A few words about how we came up with the idea of this panel before I introduce our brilliant speakers. As we know, a postdoc is a widely presented academic position in, say, mature PhD markets, but this is not the case of many emerging ones, including Russia. And postdoc is a quite novel phenomenon here, and the institutional status is very blurred. Next year, we await a coming novel national strategy behind postdoctoral studies. So the number of universities and research institutions that's going to recruit postdocs are going to surge from a few to many. But before getting into this reform, we need some reflections, clear understanding of what stands behind postdoc phenomenon, its motivation, its institutional diversity, and of course, challenges in various perspectives, especially in terms of career opportunities that are quite vague, even uncertain, given the fact that less than half of postdocs get tenure track positions. So our agenda is intentionally that broad as we're trying and we are looking for a big picture of the postdoc phenomenon and postdoc policies. And for this end, as Maria already said, this fall PhD, the Office of Postdoctoral Studies here in HEC published the special issue of the journal High Education and Beyond, and that was entirely dedicated to postdoctoral program. That was in the pursuit of putting these issues on the table for discussion. And today's panel is the next event in this line. So we are truly delighted to continue the discussion live, so to say live. And the last comments before introducing panelists, I want to give special thanks to the team behind the scene of this panel, HEC Postdoc Office and other postdocs that are hopefully present today, as I see in the chat. Many thanks for their great job for organizing this event, putting us together in all kinds of technical support. So finally, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. Today we have 6 speakers, researchers and experts in the field of post-PhD careers and academic profession overall. I hope we already have Conor Galvin, Director of PhD Program at the University College Dublin School of Education, Carrie Holley, Professor at the University of Alabama College of Education, Hugo Horta, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong, Lynn McAlpine, Professor Emerita of Higher Education Development at the University of Oxford, and Professor Emerita at McGill University, Svetlana Tvorogova, independent researcher and director of the Non-Commercial Bureau for Sociological Research and Social Project, and Maria Yutkevich, associate professor, director of the Center for Institutional Studies, and vice rector of HEC University. Welcome to all. Thanks for joining us despite these 5 time zones that we have today. So we're going to have 3 rounds of discussion based on the 3 big questions listed in our agenda, so that each speaker has 2-3 minutes for the contribution at each round. Dear participants, please feel free to write your comments and questions in the chat. You are very welcome. Sorry for my little bit long intro, so let's get it started and move to our first big question. And before talking about postdoc programs, policies, I think we need some clarification of the whole understanding of postdoc as a phenomenon. As already said, postdoc and postdoc programs are widely presented on markets that are overwhelmed with PhD holders, but not all markets are oversupplied with doctorates. And many post-PhD researchers just don't experience such a long queue for a tenure position as we have, I don't know, in the US, for example. Given this, I'm puzzled whether postdoc is inevitable, is a milestone in any academic career, and postdoc program is a must for any research university, or postdoc is a kind of, forced phenomenon in a precarious academic market. What are your viewpoints on that? Lynn, if you don't mind, I would like to start with your comment and your slide. Please share it. Lynn, I'm sorry, but you're still muted. Please unmute your mic.
Sorry, yeah. I was thinking I'd be later in the queue. Okay, so thank you for those. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And thank you for the opportunity to show this slide. And I like what you've just said, which is about thinking very broadly, big picture. Because as you said, postdocs who are actually in an institutional structured program are very privileged, in effect. So I want to show two images, which I'll come back to later on in our discussion. But the first one, why is it not working? That's odd. Let me try again. Sorry. If I do stop share and try again, because it's, let me do escape. We tried this and it worked, didn't it? So. Okay, so your question is an interesting one about who or what is a postdoc. And I think, as I said, it's about this privilege, right? Because most postdocs are, first of all, a small group of all the PhD graduates, as you can see in this image, but many of them are on contract. So so we have to be careful in what we're talking about or thinking about when we discuss postdocs. The privileged who are in programs or on fellowships, and the others who aren't. But what also is interesting to me about this image, it's a UK image of what happens to graduates, PhD graduates, is that, as you said, we're talking about a relatively small proportion of graduates. So in our discussion today, I'd like us to be thinking about what does this mean not just for postdocs and postdoc programs, but what does it mean earlier on in the career path, back in the PhD? What is it that PhD students should be doing or PhD programs should be doing? So what we need to do is bring kind of a biographical and historical perspective to this career development and begin thinking earlier. But we also, as you said, have to think more broadly about global South, global North, etc. So when we say, is the postdoc a distinct category in institutional policies, I think context is everything. So that's why I think you're right, that sometimes in some places, it may be a milestone. And there are reasons for that. So if you think of the UK, there is an oversupply. There's a reason for that oversupply because you want to have many, many PhD graduates. So you have choices about the talent that you're going to hire as postdocs. So while we often focus on the institutional context, we can't forget that the institutional context is being affected by the national and the global sector. So for instance, while you may be in the EU and it encourages mobility of knowledge, so knowledge talent exchange makes it easy to do. If you wanted to, if you're in the global South and you wanted to go to Europe, suddenly you'd be faced with visas, all kinds of restrictions. So that there are issues at that global level that we have to be paying attention to whenever we think about the institutional context. And equally, we have to think of the micro context in the center. Like there's a difference. If you have a PI who's supportive, that's going to lead to a principal investigator. That's different from a PI who, in one researcher's words, considers postdocs acquisitions, someone to do the work. So that's an important feature we have to think about. And so finally, the point I want to make is that the postdoc is also an agent. We mustn't forget that postdocs and PhD students are navigating their careers. So the more they understand all these factors, not just the local and the institutional, the more leverage they're going to have in trying to handle this oversupply, if it exists where they are, and the idea of having this kind of milestone in their career progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ling, for your contribution. Maybe Kari, could you please elaborate on this idea and share your ideas about this kind of versus milestone, or just, yeah.
Sure, thank you very much. And also thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm delighted to start my day off in such good company. I think Lynn gave some really good ideas to think about. And I just want to kind of build on her comments, if I may. I would add to that I think the postdoc is a unique disciplinary experience. So when we think about variation in the role, I think we also have to think about variation in terms of academic discipline, and if we assume it's a common part of higher education, we have to put it into the context of that sort of learning. It's also a very resource dependent role. And I think that's important to acknowledge because, you know, for some decades now, right? I mean, in terms of resources in higher education, we've seen pressures and competing pressures. So we should expect that the postdoc position is going to be in the middle of those sort of competing influences. But I think ultimately when I think about postdoctoral positions, I really think about it in terms of academic institutions, because I think they have shaped that role to their benefit. So postdoctoral positions benefit the university. Ideally, postdoc positions benefit the postdoctoral scholar at the same time. I'm not sure though that I think that's always the case. And I think, you know, the last 9-10 months, right, have taught us many things, but, you know, we've certainly seen the vulnerabilities inherent to the postdoctoral role in the same way that we've seen it to the faculty role and to the student role. It's a vulnerable position and it's a crucial one. But, you know, it has been, the institution has structured it to the benefit, right, of the institution. It's key to institutional function. Ideally, it's also a benefit to the scholar as well.
Thank you so much. Makuga, could you please comment on that? Do you agree that postdoc is more beneficial for a university than for the postdoc himself? Hugo, sorry, you're still unmuted. Yeah, unmute yourself, yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. Like Lynn says, depends on the context, right? And like Carrie says, depends, it's resource dependent. One can do what one is able to do depending on the environment and depending on the resources and depending on the support that one might have or one might not have. Let me bring two issues that I think are important. One thing is, I really like the distinction that you've made between countries that are mature or have, let's call it, a more saturated labor market for PhDs, and those who are developing. I think you're right. I think being a postdoc in both is completely different. But surprisingly, some of the challenges are not that different. Because maybe in a saturated PhD labor market, there is difficulties of finding a position sometimes, a tenure track position, which is what most postdocs are aiming at. And this is something that I think is fairly broad, because in the mind of many of the postdocs that we have currently working, particularly in the academic sector, the ultimate goal is to be able to get in. And get in not as an adjunct, not as a contract researcher, but as a tenure track, at least academic. So this is important. So there's a big competition over that, but at the same time, usually these countries have resources, and the possibility is there. And I mean, especially if you're a national, you already have some networks in the system that will help you. For those that come from abroad, probably more complicated. There's a lot of rhetoric about the kind of eulogy of internationalization. You do a postdoc abroad, and then you return. Either you stay there, or in that advanced scientific higher education system and nation, or you return in some sort of glory. Unfortunately, this is much harder than the rhetoric makes it to be. So it's a bit complicated in that sense. There's a lot of obstacles, a lot of struggles in the middle. But if we think about this from a perspective of developing higher education systems, things would be supposedly easier, but the fact is that they aren't. When we have universities with a very poorly qualified academic staff, basically, if you get a PhD, more or less you end up getting in. I mean, mainly through academic inbreeding practices and other recruitment practices, you have a position available because you are desirable, because there's so few people in the academic core with a PhD. But when you start getting to a specific level, and I know this because this is exactly happening in my country, Portugal, I see it happen in Spain, you get to a point where, yes, there are still a lot of academic positions occupied by people who do not have a PhD, but you have to wait until they retire. At the same time, we're talking about countries which have always budget constraints, and when people retire, those vacancies are not necessarily renewed. So you're in a constant waiting position. So we need to realize this. And I think it's also important to associate this with public policies. The oversupply, it's part of a difficult balancing game for policymakers. And sometimes there is a degree of irresponsibility from the side of policymakers. And I think Paulo Stefan demonstrates this very well for those postdocs in biology in the US, because for a number of years, NIH was pumped with federal funding, and suddenly they decided, okay, we don't need so much federal funding, and she demonstrated in her book, a lot of postdocs then left hanging without the position and trying to scrambling to get something. Because there was an incentive, right? There was the prospect of a career, a prospect of a job there that suddenly disappears. So a lot of this depends on public policies. And if the postdocs have agency, and I completely agree with Lynn, we have to see that a lot of what happens is also part of the agency of governments and what governments really want when they devise programs or funding that involves postdocs. Later on, I will bring the agent part from the side of the postdoc, but I will stop here and let others talk at this moment.
Thank you very much. You've got great points. I think I got two of them. Just first, that we have two different worlds of postdoc programs, of the oversupplied PhD markets with a high-ranked university, and the other one with a deficit, even deficit of PhDs. Yeah, and the second, that we have another level on postdoctoral studies and issues, governmental level, yeah, outside the universities, and this kind of policy. Svetlana, what is your take on that? So please go online.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you, dear colleagues. It's really a vivid discussion. I would like to address the issue from slightly different a point of view. So you mentioned this duality, milestone or oversupply. I think it's an evolution. So originally it was a milestone that because of the evolution of the system developed into a different situation. And continuing just this analog, we might actually start speculating, addressing the issue, what might the future offer higher educational institutions now so actively challenged by the current crisis and so on be, and how the role of postdocs as an initiative, as a forward, might influence what is happening. I think in this journal issue, which was dedicated to the topic, you brought some very nice examples on how postdoc programs might be addressed and designed. For example, this issue in College University of Dublin, so how they did it in order to make it attractive. We know, like Hugo, you were addressing this issue, that there are territories more attractive and less attractive. You might have them internationally, you might have them as well nationally. So you have capital cities, which are nice to be in with bustling universities, and you may have some provincial areas that also have some university ambitions. So we might think about postdoc as a well-organized postdoc program with community, supporting creativity, supporting exchange, supporting true scholarship and true academic engagement as a good tool to promote this new type of academic thinking, of academic community, which opposes the current trend of being highly competitive among your peers, of trying to get maximum out of this very acute competition and so on and so forth. So talking about policies, whether at institutional level or at national level, we might look for some initiatives or some ideas that could lay this foundation for such new formats and could bring this issue to another level. That's what I would suggest to think.
Thank you very much, Sana, for your contribution. And I really like your idea about the evolution from the milestone to a forced phenomenon. That's a great point. Maybe I would like to pass the word to Connor. We are very welcome. And could you please share your ideas according to your experience as a great practitioner and leader of the PhD program and research as well, please?
Well, thanks very much, and apologies, colleagues, for joining you slightly late. It's one of those COVID moment things that I won't get into. It's an interesting conversation, and what I've heard so far from Hugo and the comments that have just been made by Svetlana would echo really very strongly with our experience here at UCD. Now, I'm going to start by saying that I do not think the UCD model is a perfect model or anything like it, but I think it's improving and has improved steadily since its introduction. So we've been in the, and I'm going to use the term deliberately, we've been in the business of engaging with this whole area of postdocs and postdoctoral training in a serious way since around 2006. And it would not have happened if it wasn't for a European initiative, in my view. So the thinking for this started to come in at the European level, and they modeled it on perhaps what was going on in the United States and elsewhere, but they also tried to improve it in certain ways. And one of the elements that I think makes a difference is this idea of community. I think Svetlana is absolutely right. There is an element of community building involved in the work that we do with postdocs that would not have been there previously. If it were not for this European initiative. So the funding, Ireland is a very small country, and our universities, we have 8 universities scattered across the island. And no single university could have come up with a really good model on its own. So we borrowed heavily from the European traditions. We talked a little bit to each other because there is competition. And UCD then ran with a model that has become more or less the way that the rest of the universities have started to do it now in Ireland. So that's important in terms of background and context. The big difference really is that we started with this assumption that we're building community, and there are no promises made in relation to tenure track. So when someone comes to UCD on a postdoctoral appointment, it is not on the assumption that they're on some kind of a tenure track. It is to build up expertise and to build up capability, working alongside and working with field leaders in their area. So the appointment is for 4 years or 5 years in some cases, and there are different levels. There's level 1 and level 2 on the research side. There's also the possibility of an appointment against a fellowship, a teaching fellowship. Now, those people, interestingly, do tend to go on to become more involved in university life more generally, and a number of those have succeeded in stepping almost seamlessly into the core of what we do in UCD. And I think it's because of what Hugo has said there earlier about the fact that, you know, people step off one end of the treadmill and you need somebody to step in at the other. So there is a little bit of forward thinking going on in that space, but probably not enough. And the assumption when someone comes to UCD is that they're joining a community. They're joining a community for 4 to 5 years, and they will go away from that community having had a good, positive experience and with a lot of additional side qualifications to their name that they've kind of put together or amassed through the UCD support system. So it's a little bit different, I think, from what we've been hearing so far. This does not mean that people don't move into the UCD system or other universities, but the expectation is not that they will. The expectation is that they will come to UCD, work for 5 years, and then move on. So I think that's a slightly different understanding of the postdoctoral context. And that sort of frames what we go on to do. And I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later when others have had their say on this particular topic.
Yeah, Connor, thank you very much. Many insights, and really like the idea about that being a postdoc is not only getting a tenure track position, but it's because of the process of getting new skills, of strengthening ties in the community, so many other things outside getting the position, the permanent position. And I want to give the final contribution, final word to this round to Maria Utkevich, our leader of postdoctoral program HSC, initiator of this program in the research and academic profession. Please, Maria.
Thank you, Vera. Dear colleagues, I'd like to just probably bring some national context in the discussion. And my claim would be a little bit surprising in a way that postdocs as an institution, I would say, is totally against academic culture in Russia. Why is that? Because first, Russian universities do not have academic tenure. So we don't have long life contracts. But academic career in Russian university is normally a single university career. So quite many people enter university as students, they stay for PhD program, then they get a position, and after that they go for like the senior years outside in 40, sometimes 50 years. So, and we don't have any tenure legally, but de facto, until recently, we do have tenure, which means that there is no place for such positions as 1 or 2 or 3 years postdocs. Why is that? Because most universities consider that in this way. I do have a young faculty, which is good and promising. Why let him or her go if she's good? Let's try to keep her or him with us. And if he's leaving, it's kind of betrayal of the university. And many people are scared because they said, you can go for 1 year, but you should never come back. We don't bring you back to our family. And that's make quite good and bright and promising people fearing that they're promising de facto long-term position in university. They should give it up for 1 year somewhere, probably in the better place. But what's going to be after that? How is it going to be considered in the labor market? And that's the problem. That's why not many Russian universities now do have postdocs program. And I think the puzzle is why still they do it? Why, for example, HEC wants to bring postdocs? And I think the answer is that it's the only way to contribute in building the national labor market. So to go from the model when all universities in the country are kind of local monopolies into the model with universities having networks between each other and being combined in one national academic system. And I think that postdocs in the formative years of their career are the best people to bring reputation of one university to another one and to build such networks. And in that sense, I do believe that the biggest contribution of postdoc institution in Russia is not just like doing extra research with those people, but those people being kind of astronauts who go from one planet to another one, building them all together in the Milky Way. That's how I see that. Thank you.
Maria, thank you very much. If you don't mind, I would like to add one fact about Russian context. In Russia, only 10 or 15% of PhD students complete PhD programs. So we have this kind of immense dropout rate. I mean that academic markets are so diverse, and definitely postdoc programs are not a one-size-fits-all strategy and one-size-fits-all story. And I think this leads us to the second round. And Dennis, please moderate this block.
Thank you, Vera. Dear colleagues, welcome to the second round of our discussion. And I was very happy that all the issues discussed in the first round, we can continue in the second. And probably the general topic was to see the differences of the postdocs, and we have so many inputs from our contributors so that we can just continue. I have special questions to our speakers, but you can speak just to the general topic of this round. First question goes to Hugo. You have announced that postdocs is very different in terms of countries' national context. You have experienced research and experienced higher education in Europe and now in from Hong Kong. How can you see the differences of approaches to this position? Maybe you can just focus on this Asia experience.
Well, there has been an evolution. There's clearly an evolution. First of all, I'm not sure if it was Carrie or if it was Lynn who mentioned this, but the kind of postdoc that you are in makes a difference, even if you are in the same system. The Portuguese government, for example, had a postdoctoral grant where basically you would write a proposal, you would compete nationally, and the acceptance rate would be very low. But if your proposal was good enough, if your profile was good enough, you would get funding for, I think, 3 years, if I'm not wrong. And those 3 years, every month you would get the grant coming to your bank account, and you basically do whatever you wanted. This is completely different from those who would get a postdoctoral position in a project, because then they have to work for others. They are working under a PI that tells them this is what you need to do. So it's much more constrained in terms of the autonomy, in terms of what you can do. And then are those that are in projects and they are hired for 6 months. Being hired for 6 months or being hired for 1 year makes a lot of difference. And it's not only a lot of difference in terms of your career, in terms of what you can contribute to the project, to your own academic or to your own scientific profile, but also what it means in terms of family ties, sense of safety, security, stability. All of this is different. And I'm talking within the same system. Actually, what you're having in Hong Kong is, I can tell you what is happening here. The research funding agency is having a tremendous impact. Once again, this is government policy. And the emphasis is when you submit a project, try to include the training of a PhD student, graduate a PhD rather than invest on a postdoc. Two reasons for this. The postdoc is more expensive. So a big chunk, if you get the project, a big chunk goes to the salary of the postdoc. And the postdocs are so expensive here because of the salaries that you can only hire the postdoc at most for 1 year, while you can have a PhD for the duration of the entire project. And the university is also on board with this, because the universities have incentives to have PhD students rather than postdocs. So there's a lot of different incentives going on. In Portugal, the situation is a little bit different, but the current situation there is the government changed the rules and basically said, okay, the postdocs, they won't have a grant anymore. They're going to have a contract, and we're going to pay for 6 years for these postdocs to be postdocs. But guess what? At the end of the 6th year, you have to hire the postdoc. Tremendous resistance from the universities. They don't want this. They are perfectly fine to have the postdocs there for 6 years and then say, my friend, it was a pleasure. See you later. Let's bring someone new. And there is an explanation for this as well, because the universities are afraid that then they won't have the budget to support these postdocs in the future. So there's a lot of complexities around this. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I gave some hints as to the differences and similarities that one can find. I don't know if my colleagues want to comment.
Yeah, thank you. At least we understand that the postdoc is just an universal term, but we can mean different position, different options under this position. Yes. Okay, let's go to the Russian context, and the next question goes to Maria. You have mentioned the Russian context and the idea of postdoctoral program, and my question was especially, how do HEC just take this risk to implement the postdoctoral program in the system with the high inbreeding share? It was really risky, and just tell a bit experience how it works in general.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would like to start with an anecdote or joke. It's an old one about a British gentleman who used to be for 30 years alone on the island. And at some point in 30 years, he was rescued, and he gave a tour to the captain of the ship who was going to take him back to UK. And he said, here I live, and here is my animals, and here is my gentleman club. And here's my another gentleman club. And he was asked by the captain, why, Mr. Smith, you're alone here, but you have 2 gentleman clubs in one tiny island. And he responded, it's because that's club A, and I always go here, and that's club B, and I never go there. And why I'm talking about this anecdote? Because HEC has 2 postdoc programs, and they're completely different. We started about 10 years ago with international postdoc programs to complement our tenure track program from the international labor market. And our idea was that some people don't want to risk and come to Russia for 6 years, but they might come for 1 year, especially if they were not given places in Harvard and Stanford. And HEC might be the perfect place for them to stay for 1 year or a couple of years, looking for better places in the UK or US or in Europe. And it worked perfectly, because when you come to the country and you like the university, you might think, okay, it's not that risky, it's not that bad, it's even good. Let me apply for a tenure track position. And some people did that. But after some years, we decided it works well with international labor market. let's try national postdoc labor market. And that's completely different program, because here we have inbreeding and low mobility and necessity to push people to apply. But in some sense, those two programs, they start converging to each other, because Yulia mentions that several times, that we do have surveys of our former postdocs, asking them what was the contribution to your career of being in HEC one year. And many people respond like that. I was in the University X for some years, and then I came to HEC, and I learned that that's a totally different world. And now I want to go to another university, because there are so many worlds around me, and I want to learn about them and make my career as diverse as possible. And I think that's a great contribution for national postdoc program. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's really smart to have two strategies for the recruitment of postdocs, for international and national. I think in this case it works really good. Okay, the next question I will have to for Lynn. As we know, this phenomena established in the US and North America in general after the Second World War, and it was we know that there are different leagues in higher education and the research system also, and I would like to know, I wonder if it is, if postdoctoral program are a sign of some excellence or privileged universities, or it is a regular instrument for, let's say, middle universities as well. How can you explain?
Well, I'm not sure if I can explain. I can give you my interpretation.
yeah, please.
So, and I'm going to pick up on Lev's question there in the chat, because I think it's true to a certain extent about university rankings, etc. Because we know, for instance, that it's research universities generally that tend to produce the most PhDs, graduates, but they don't get hired necessarily into those universities. But I want to think also about this question of what do we mean by a program? And it raises really interesting issues, I think, because again, if you remember my image 2, the one with the concentric circles all nested, we often talk about postdoc programs at the national or ultranational level, like the EU or country level. And those programs are really very competitive. They're about money. And what they do is they give individuals independence, but they don't provide a structure. It's left up to the individual to decide how to create the structure of that postdoc experience. And then we have what it sounds like you have, which is very rare but wonderful, where there's actually at the institutional level an integrative curriculum designed to support the development, the career development of postdocs. Another interesting example of one is where I do some work, is the European University Institute, which has a 1-year program, which is a curriculum designed to do a range of things. But many universities, because of national policies, so for instance, in the UK, offer training. So we have to think also, is a program a whole bunch of discrete workshops that people can pick and choose from within the institution and make it up the way they want? Of course, that raises important issues, because if you offer that kind of training or postdoc support, then it's going to be more accessible. because it's available to anyone. It's not competitive. So that means people on contract would be able to participate. That could be a plus, but then they may be having problems with their PI, and their PI may not support them not working and want them to not do that. So that means you have to find ways to reward the PI for encouraging people to participate. So when it comes back to it, we've got this set of factors, again, coming back to the macro, the national, the institutional, but also the micro, the relationship between the postdoc and the person they're working with if they're on contract. And so I want to go to the bigger question, and it's probably embedded in your program, but we already know a lot about what can support postdocs. Of course, it has to do with a great PI, a supportive PI. But we know, for instance, that exposure to non-academic careers during a postdoc, but even before a postdoc, during a PhD, can be influential in opening up people's understanding of what the career opportunities are. We know that having a written research plan, not just in your head, can have a powerful effect. So that's something that even a postdoc can do. They don't need someone else to be doing it for them. And also training for teaching. If they haven't learned how to teach in the PhD, then learning how to teach can help develop their profile. So I think we don't need to depend on extremely highly resourced, highly qualified universities to say that it's not possible to offer postdocs resources. It just means some strategic thinking and being prepared to support or reward PIs for encouraging people to participate. And it means that postdocs have to be agentive. Because one of the most striking things to me, if you look at the research, is the reports of how few postdocs actually take up the workshop opportunities that are available to them in their institutions. So it means, again, coming back to as a postdoc, you're the one who cares most about your career. So it means understanding the system and negotiating it, navigating it as successfully as you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I give a bit comment about the question. We know that that there are many different big excellence program in China, in Germany, for example, and universities create graduate school and new postdoctoral program to be very competitive. And from this side, I'm looking from Russia, from our point of view, it is, and as postdoctoral program is a new phenomenon, we link it to these privileged universities, top-ranked universities. I think maybe Svetlana can comment it. You have a really great contribution about the Russian universities which need to do this first step to implement such program for Russian context with Russian features. And what is your opinion on this?
Thank you, Dennis. I really think that when we address this issue, we have to bear in mind two perspectives. So we often switch from one to another. There is individual perspective of a postdoc and his or her choices and his or her actions and proactivity. There is also organizational perspective. What kind of framework could we create to enable these individual stories to happen? Because all people are brilliant. They have made all this way so far. But also brilliant people need help and need support, like Conor was, I think, highlighting in his comments and examples. So I think the core issue to let all these things happen and work at its best is think about the organizational prerequisites and some solutions at the organizational level that could enable us to minimize all those concerns Hugo was talking about, like my personal choices, my family obligations, my insecurity as a postdoc, because normally postdocs are people who already have families or are thinking about having a family, and that's definitely adds to the personal circumstances that we have to bear in mind. And then we come to the whole purpose of why doing a postdoc, so why people would like to stay in academia. And I think here we also have to bear in mind this creativity, this desire to be creative, academically creative. And here we come to another issue, that in order to be creative, you need this kind of freedom. So when you are always under burden of these short-term contracts and short-term grants you have to permanently write to be ordered to, to provide your daily existence, that is not the format which is working. So you need some kind of horizon in front of you. And that's what I think the organizational framework might help to bring and to promote and to establish. And not just this horizon, but also the community aspect, so that people could communicate, exchange, not only among themselves, like what Maria was talking about. So I earned some experience here, me personally, but it is also, I think, one of the most important things about academic life is this communication among the peers and intergenerational as well. So you learn from the people who are older than you, who did other things than you, and thus you could promote this interdisciplinary exchange, new ideas, new type of thinking. And the last thing which I believe is really important to bear in mind is that when we talk about organizational solutions, about the people, the frameworks, we now tend to think primarily about higher educational institutions. So we speak about higher education domain, but we live nowadays, and it's not only higher educational institutions or academic institutions that do great research. Business community is very active in that as well. And so if we name our time as the time of global competition for talents, then it's not only the academia which is competing for talents. And when all the postdocs are complaining about their poor fate, their lack of chances, their low career perspectives in the academia, where should they look for? They would look for business solutions. And I think we have, again, as a higher education community, think about good options that could keep on this competition with the business communities, because salaries there are better compared to what academia could offer. There might be less restrictions because there is a lot of academic bureaucracy, we all know that, and so on and so forth. So it is important to find solutions which let the academia be competitive in this global market, not just among the countries, but also among the different sectors.
Thank you very much. You have made a very good introduction to our next round. I suppose it's competitiveness, not between the research system, but between the labor markets, as I understood, academic and non-academic. But first, let me put the question for Kari and Connor as well. Regarding the differences in the postdoctoral program, Kari, you have mentioned and have written also in the contribution to the journal that even postdocs program were established to improve STEM research in the US, yes, in the 20th century. And now if you look at the labor market vacancies, we can find easily postdocs for vacancies for IT, biology, medicine, and so on, and for social sciences not so much. And it still remains that postdocs still works mostly for life sciences. If I'm right, can you give the comment from your side?
Sure, I do think there's truth to that, just in terms of the science or STEM heavy focus of postdocs, at least looking at it from a US perspective. I would add to that, and I think the other speakers have addressed this as well, it also is institutional dependent. I mean, because of the resources required, there's only a certain segment of institutions where, you know, you would expect to find the kind of role. But I do think a historical analysis of the postdoctoral position in the US shows how connected and networked it is to other parts, both within and outside of the university. I mean, if I think about where has the change come from in terms of postdocs, we have a National Postdoctoral Association, which is, you know, an independent group. That's a place for postdocs across disciplines and across universities, and that advocates for the unique needs of postdocs. There's certainly been a federal investment from the federal government, you know, the National Science Foundation or NIH, you know, you mentioned that earlier. And there has been change from the institutions themselves and also from the postdocs themselves, right? I think Lynn's comments and others about career, you know, and having agency really resonated with me when I think about the future of postdocs, right? But because the role can be so unclear, you know, I worry sometimes that means that institutions aren't as committed to the individual as we would want them to be. That is, they can be committed to the role, but not to the person in the role, right? And because there's such an oversupply, at least again, US perspective of PhD graduates, you simply replace the person with another one, which connects to, and I think Maria mentioned it, this idea of where do they go next in terms of that national, international, global labor market, which is really a key part of the conversation. I think it's difficult to talk about what postdocs need without understanding where they're going next.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yep, the infrastructure for postdocs is really huge in the US, and thank you for a statement. Yeah, Connor, please. You have also mentioned different types of postdocs in the OECD, long and short terms, and different type of finance for postdocs, also for European founder and for national ones. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Yeah, I mean, our postdocs do come in from very, very many different directions, but just to chase down what Carrie was saying there, a lot of it is about structure, and what Lynn was saying, a lot of it is about being agentive. But it needs to be agentive not just at the individual level, it needs to be agentive at the institutional level as well. And I think if I were to say what UCD has done well, I'm normally the person that's saying we're not doing this right, we're not doing that right. I'm the person that's always criticizing. But if I were to say what we have done well, I would say it has been in relation to structuring a program that is agentive at the institutional level. So regardless of what route people come in from, they're offered a contract. That's the first thing. And it is a contract at the university level. It is not with the individual PI. So even if I come to UCD to work on a particular project with the PI, my contract is a university project, not a contract to the PI. And I think that is actually important because it sets the tone of the relationship between the individual and the university, as well as the tone of the relationship between the individual and the PI. So part of the university arrangements in the last couple of years in terms of supporting PIs and their projects has been to put a little bit of pressure, and it has been necessary. It's, you know, PIs don't give up their postdoc time too readily. So you have to put a bit of pressure on the PIs to see beyond the immediate project, to see that these are in the main young people that do have to keep an eye on the horizon, that do have to be looking to the future, and that the PI as well as the university has a responsibility to help with that. So that sets the tone of the relationship. And if a postdoc wants to do a very formal series, what Lynn described as a curriculum type approach, that is possible. You can sign up to a very formalized program within the university. The PIs don't always like it, but if you ask for it, they have to support you in terms of release time and so on. And that program is organized jointly by the university itself. There's a central unit in the university. Now, sometimes it's only 2 people, but they sit at the university center and they are responsible for coordinating and helping in relation to the postdoc experience in the university generally. So you have the unit at the center. You have the people in the Graduate Studies Board who do want to make available some teaching time and are open to approaches by PIs for teaching time. But it has to come from the PI on behalf of the postdoc, if you see what I mean. Right? It's not the postdoc who applies for the teaching, it's the PI who applies for teaching time for their postdoc. And the third leg, if you like, of the stool, because the stool will not stand on 2 legs alone, it has to have a third leg. The third leg of the stool is provided by the University Teaching Centre. So all academics in UCD have a certain entitlement to upskilling programs that involve gaining certificates and diplomas for university level teaching. That particular program is open to all postdocs from the day that they come into the university. So in the space of 6 to 8 months, you can build up a certificate in university teaching and learning, or you can build up in the space of a year and a half, you can build up a diploma in university teaching and learning. And that is at no cost to either the project or to the individual postdoc or to the PI. It is actually provided as part of the university's contribution to your future. And again, I think that was a lovely thing to do. And I think it's a necessary thing to do because it shows that you're interested in postdocs as people and in their future, as well as what they can do for us here and now. So Dennis, just to go back then to the types, the different types very briefly. We have postdoc 1 and postdoc 2. And the difference there is the length of the contract. Postdoc 1 contracts are usually 3 years. Postdoc 2 contracts are 4 to 5 years. And they are usually connected with a project or a series of connected projects. So that's the first type. The second type of contract is what we call a fellowship. And those are, they seem to be more similar to the kinds of experience that people have in other places. You come in for 6 months or 8 months or a year and a half on a very specific project to do a very specific job. But regardless of whether you are a fellow or on a longer contract, you still have access to everything that the postdocs have access to in our scheme. The biggest problem is getting information about them. Because if you come in as a fellow, you don't have the same channels of communication that you might have if you're there for 2 or 3 years. So a postdoc and their supporter, their mentor, has to work very hard in relation to try to keep that line open and moving. And the third type then is what we call the ad astra. Now that's based on the university motto. It's some aspirational thing about heading for the stars, you know. So it's a bit like Maria's cosmonauts or astronauts or whatever. The difference there is that you're actually more likely to be seen as someone who will stay at University College Dublin. So it is not something that's automatic. You don't come up through UCD and get an ad astra. You apply from the outside, and it is competitive. It is European, and the ad astra fellows are appointed for 5 years with an open agenda. So they're given full contractual appointments as university researchers and teachers attached to a particular school for 5 years. A very interesting feature of that is that most of the ad astras I am familiar with are actually in humanities and social sciences and not in the STEM areas. Now, I'm not saying they're, because the contract 1, the postdoc 1 and postdoc 2 tend to be in the life sciences and tend to be in the natural sciences areas. So about 60% of all postdocs at UCD at any one time, 6 out of every 10, are working on science, they're working on medicine, they're working on big tech, And a lot of those would already have connections with companies, because very often the UCD projects are connected to tech companies and so on. So they would have that kind of ongoing conversation with the business world that seems to be important in the postdoc setting as well. I hope that responds adequately to your question. And I'm sorry if I'm just throwing in a lot of information or whatever, but you know.
Thank you very much, Conrad. It's very interesting. I can summarize from the whole round that we have so many issues to discuss that we can continue our work, but we will announce at the end about it. And let's go for the third round. We have over the time, unfortunately. I would suggest I have find out a quotation to the topic of non-academic employment of postdocs. It was repeated addressed sometimes in the panel, and we could not to speak about this issue. I will suggest that I will read up this quotation, and you will say your short statement to this one. It is a quotation of David Bogle from Nature Job Blogs, who searched or just writing about non-academic employment of postdocs, and the title sounds, "How could universities and funders improve the situation for postdoctoral scientists?" Okay, now the quotation. "Postdocs are vital for universities to deliver ambitious research agendas, but are too often treated as paper writing machines rather than a truly independent scientist. For many, writing papers and focusing on the science might be exciting and personally satisfying, but it will have limited benefit for the long term, for a future beyond academia." Well, it's preparation of or educating of postdocs from non-academic labor market. It's a special topic. Please, now you can give your opinion to this statement. Please feel free to say.
Can I start?
Please.
Okay,
Sure,
I would
sure.
say if you are in a situation where all you are doing is writing papers, you're in the wrong postdoctoral program. You're probably in the wrong university as well. I think if somebody is treated like that, it's shameful. I think it denies the fact that postdoctoral education and training is a continuation of the profession building aspect of your work. And it should help you to prepare for whatever future comes. Now, in some cases, people will opt for staying in the university sector. In other cases, in many cases, people will opt to move out of the university sector. So I think a good postdoctoral experience will give you a certain amount of paper qualification, but also a huge amount of confidence and capability that will allow you to bridge that gap. And that's the kind of postdoctoral experience you need to be looking for. Not one where you are a chicken producing, you know, high value journal papers or whatever the analogous might be. I'll stop.
Yeah, thank you. Colonel, please. Hugo, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I agree with Connor, but it depends where the motivation comes from. And I think we need to go back a bit here to what happens during the doctoral years. The motivation of students, of doctoral students, a lot of it is to become academics. These motivation, these expectations, even when confronted with a very strained academic labor market, does not necessarily go away. Sometimes when they're doing the postdoc, they want to do papers, they want to write papers because there's still the hope that they might get it. And this is powerful. I know a story of a postdoc that told me he was doing the postdoc in Belgium. And actually the university did something that I think all universities should do, which was he gave an estimate saying this year, X number of postdocs were hired by the university, like 1% or 2% of you will stay. So be aware of this. But when he talked to all the postdocs around him, all of them were thinking that 1%, it's me. All of them. So it's not only the institution pushing this, it's also sometimes that they still believe. And this is very powerful, because when you look at studies concerning preferences of PhD students to go and work in different sectors of activity, one of the main determinants for them to prefer to work in other sectors of activity other than academia is because they don't like to do research that much. They figure out that they didn't like to do research that much, number one. Number two, they didn't like academic life and the academic environment that much. So they moved elsewhere. But then again, we go back to the developed, non-developed countries. You know, I was fortunate enough to spend part of my PhD in one of the top 50 US universities in a department of engineering. And to me, it was a massive surprise at that time as a PhD student that at least 50% of the students were considering working not in academic sector, but for federal agencies or for business. And this was unheard of. Why? Partly because in my country, you don't have an economic sector in terms of companies with the size and with the technological knowledge base kind of fundamentals to hire PhDs. They're not there. There's no jobs outside academia in a country like mine. You have them in some countries because the big corporations are there, because these big industrial labs exist, because the public sector is dynamic in terms of its research component, and they hire people for public administration. In other countries, this is not a reality. So the only choice is, like Maria said, either I entrench myself here and hopefully a position will open in my university and I get it, or I have to move abroad. Brain drain or brain circulation, depending. This is important. And then if we think about this, because what Lynn is saying is absolutely right. Very few postdocs participate in these workshops for other potential careers outside academia. During the PhD, it's pretty much the same thing. Partly because the students are not interested on the one hand, and partly because, very honestly, a lot of these courses and programs are provided by academics who don't know. I mean, I remember being in a conference organized by the Commission, and there was this guy from an association of European universities, if I'm not wrong, that was saying what we're teaching to our PhD students is not entrepreneurship, is theory of entrepreneurship. What use is this for them? We don't know. The findings were, we don't know how to do a business plan. We don't know how to open a firm. How are you going to teach? But you're teaching entrepreneurship. No, you're teaching theory of entrepreneurship. And of course, people are not motivated. Well, what will I do? It's very nice, probably intellectually stimulating, but so what? Okay, just to be a bit polemic here.
Thank you very much for your very impressive contributions. We really enjoy it. I see the faces of participants. Lynn,
sorry,
please.
because I have to leave soon. I want to pick up on what Svetlana said about research going on in other places than higher education institutions and research institutions. And this question of preparing for a career outside academia and whether it's a responsibility of a host institution. It seems to me that Yes, partly that could be the case. So for instance, they could be doing alumni follow-up studies of PhD graduates, and those who are working outside higher education might become mentors, or they might provide shadowing opportunities for PhD graduates or even PhDs. Or if you go back, remember my first image, back earlier to the PhD period, you could have interesting combinations where people are doing joint PhDs in a university and elsewhere. So in Wales, there are some really interesting social sciences programs where people are working with two supervisors, one inside and one outside the university. So working in the public sector on a public sector issue, but guided by the two supervisors. Also, I think that postdocs and postdoc societies could be more agentive in encouraging institutions to do this exploration, to start documenting those careers that are out there. But I think we also have to acknowledge that there's very little research in this area of what kinds of careers there are outside the academy. The little research that has been done doesn't really differentiate the sector, or it tends to be mostly STEM, mostly private sector, but it doesn't differentiate the organization. What's the mission of the organization? What's the actual work that's entailed? It doesn't differentiate national economic policies. It doesn't. So what we're left with is, even if we think it's an important thing for universities to do, or postdoc programs, or the postdocs themselves, my question to those of people like me and Hugo and Carrie and others maybe in this group, is, as researchers of early career academics, do we need to start broadening our focus and researching non-academic careers? Because we need that knowledge if we want both postdocs to understand the options, but also feed it back earlier into the process, into the PhD and even master's aspects, because we know that that has an influence on people's thinking. Because in our research, many postdocs said they continued in this insecurity because they didn't know what else there was. They had no idea of the options or the opportunities, so it was easier just to stay. Anyway, I have to go because I'm doing another session shortly, but it's been great. Thank you for the invitation. Bye.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Thanks.
Well, I think Lynn brought us a new research topic for future research, to find out to study non-academic career of postdocs. Yeah, colleagues, Svetlana, please.
I wanted to continue some of the ideas that were briefly mentioned before, particularly how could we address this continuation, and where and who is responsible for supporting postdocs in their further career ideas. I guess it could be linked back to what we think and believe the future of the higher education as institution also should be. Well, from my perspective, it remains an open question, which might be also very hotly debated at the moment. It's quite a tricky question from what I know and what I see. And one of the initiatives we see in this field is this, Science 2.0, this call for applicability of knowledge, of research generated, and so on and so forth. And thus the universities are pushed with their third mission, and so their connections with the business and with the wider society. And from this perspective, I think it is also possible to address postdoctoral programs as a part of universal responsibility for the people it produces, for the talents it uses. Because at the end, I think the talents, these talented people who got so much investment into them, their human capital, their networks, their symbolic power, it's all with them, and using them in the best possible way is also in our interest as society, and as organizations as well. So I would think that it might be reasonable to consider as again, whether a national program or inter-university initiative or an initiative within a particular university on how you could connect with other stakeholders in order to find the best options, the best use for these talented people within the regional economy, for example, because we know that many regions, like in Hugo's examples about Portugal, or we might bring tons of other examples from other parts of the world, how people are living in the region. And in many regions, the universities are present. So we could use them as certain anchors to let the people stay. And we could use these anchors to in their joint activities and their cooperation as cooperation promoters for the regional enterprises, for the regional businesses, companies, for the national companies present in the region, how they could work together with these universities in order to use in the best possible ways these talents that are here, that are looking for new challenges. And so this isolation that we see nowadays might be part of the challenge that people face at the individual level, because as we all were saying, they lack the perspective. And it might be the universities that might open up those doors and foster this communication, this exchange, this interaction with the others. And another aspect in this, I think we also keep getting back to it, is the sustainability issue. Because why the university is not hiring a postdoc on a permanent basis, because it is scared that it might not have enough resources in the long term. And so maybe here, again, making these connections with the local businesses, maybe local governments also interested in having the people who stay in the region, bright people, talented people who make the region change, might again open the door for these sustainability schemes, because everybody is interested in that. It's not so easy to find a solution, but it might be a possible option for them.
Thank you, Svetlana. I was also, from Russian perspective, thinking about it, how the industry can be interested in postdocs and take this responsibility also. It is a really big question in the, as Hugo said, in the developing countries, if industries and business are interested in postdocs. Well, yeah, colleagues, yeah, Maria, please.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to what our previous speaker has said, and just to stress a little bit that now the border between university and academic life and what are going on outside academia is much more uncertain and blurred. So it's not ivory towers. We're not in the ivory towers anymore. And sometimes research contracts outside academia is much more nice and rich than within academia. So I do know some people who, for example, went from Russia to US, to Silicon Valley to do biotech postdocs there. And they said, no, we give up. We go to biotech industry because it gives us more time for research and we don't need just write papers for our boss. So, or other people leave for universities for places like Amazon or Facebook or Google to do research there. And now universities need to compete for some talented people with those research preparations. But I also believe that we sometimes overestimate those words in the way that our stereotype is that if you go into the university career, you do what you want. If you go in the industry, you do what your boss wants. It's not like that. It's never been like that. Because in both cases, your job is to make other people believe that they care about your research. and you write your papers, and then you need to sell your papers, which means you need to explain why your question is important and why research society should care about that, because it's the only way to go into journals, into books, into everything. You need to explain why other people should care. That's what postdocs should learn in the very beginning of the career. As researchers, they should learn that what they do is both what makes their life exciting, but it's also a contribution to global knowledge. And they need to prove that this contribution is important. And if they learn it, they can go any other place after that, outside academia. And if they learn the skill to sell what they do and explain why it's important, they would survive anywhere. But the problem is that many people believe that academic job is just do what you want from the morning till night. But it's not like that anymore. It's never been like that. So, and if young people just reframe the way they consider academic job, they're going to be okay in life, wherever they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Being a part of the HEC program for the second year, I can ensure you that we slowly understand this thought, what they are talking about. Yeah, Kari?
Just briefly, it's been really fascinating to hear those comments. I would simply add, of all the segments in the university that I see as ripe for innovation, the postdoctoral part of it is certainly one of them. And so many great ideas today as to how to think about it globally, but also in a specific national context as well. It's really a crucial part of what we do. And we need to do it well, considering all these different variations.
Yeah, thank you very much. I suppose the postdocs which are visiting us to attend the roundtable thought that startup as a participation of the postdoc program is not enough. Maybe you should think further and about the plan about the postdoctoral career, not even in the academia. Thank you very much for the third round, and maybe we have some question. I give the floor to Vera. Vera, please.
Dear colleagues, so what a great discussion. I think the great discussion is the one which gets you somewhere you didn't expect it. So we're looking for a big picture, and I have even a bigger one than I expected. Well, we've got lively discussion in the chat, and many of the questions already get their answers. Thank you, speakers, very much for that. And I still have one question that really bothers me, and maybe our discussion brings me to this idea that we are discussing that we need some kind of reinvention of the whole idea of the postdoc program, that the initial intention that postdoc fellowship is something to bridge the gap between PhD completion and tenure track. This is irrelevant to the current situation. This just fails because of the oversupply. We are talking so much about the outside academia careers and so on and so forth. So maybe we should speak about another goal of postdoc career, and what is it? And maybe this is the last super short question, just for 10-15 seconds take for speakers who would like to say about what is the postdoc program goal now, given all the challenges that we are witnessing. So please, and we will finish. Maybe just who's ready, maybe Hugo, what is the new goal of postdoc program?
It's a bit difficult to say, really, because these things, depend on context, depend on resources, and depend on what people want to do. A bit what Svetlana mentioned, there are plenty of opportunities out there, but people really need to strategize and decide this is probably the best way, this is the options. And above all, I think we need to be very, very clear and transparent to the new PhD entrants. Sometimes I don't think this work is done. And basically to say, look, I know you have these expectations, but this is reality. At least universities should be the moral obligation of saying this. You, even if you complete successfully your program, you will have these possibilities in terms of careers. And for the academic career, there is this amount of obstacles. It's going to be very, very difficult. I'm not saying you can't do it, but keep this in mind and at least have a plan B. And if the universities are going to offer a possibility of plan B, at least provide courses and workshops and training with people jointly or with people that can really provide that training to give realistic options for them to choose careers outside academia, wherever they are possible.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is the whole essence of the idea that postdoc program is not also only about research, and you should be ready and prepared for the outside academia and all about the professional development. This is the kind of part of your track career and not also only about research. Well, that's really important, great discussion. And now we have to wrap up. Dear colleagues, thank you so much for this really insightful and thought-provoking event. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all too. I hope we will continue to discuss these issues in next events, and please stay tuned. We're going to host one more roundtable on upcoming April conference, and we'll deal with the postdoctoral agenda, but this time we're going to dive in the Russian context. So looking forward to see you again. Take care and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you to all participants.